Okay, it's a predecessor to a previous game that this developer made, which was called Man of Medan. And Man of Medan is sort of a spiritual sequel to another game called Until Dawn. So these are all from the same developer. And the only reason I mention Man of Medan and Until Dawn is I've worked on all three of these games with Supermassive, who are amazing, and we've sort of been perfecting this kind of cinematic experience for horror. So it's not like a standard third-person shooter kind of perspective. It's more about being immersed and making decisions, lots of dialogue, developing characters, and most importantly, lots of different ways that the game can play out. You are by no means on any kind of rails. Any person in the game of who you have the chance to play from their perspective as you walk through, any person can die. And even with Little Hope, they've taken it a step further, and there are like completely different aspects of the game that you get, depending on the conversations you have based on the choices that you make. It's not just, do I go into the scary house or do I walk down the foggy road? It's, how do I respond to this person's, criticizing my character for being not scared enough or not, whatever. You make these decisions, and it really does change things up for the game, which is very, very cool. It's literally like a choose your own adventure, the old little books that I used to read as a kid. It's definitely like, it's not as, well, I shouldn't say it's not as impossible as it sounds. I always feel like it's impossible at the beginning, but I've been working with these guys for such a long time now, and we've got a pretty good system worked out where the music is really detailing more of either sort of the atmosphere of your location or kind of the general gameplay state. So it can be very up in the air, and I give Supermassive like all the pieces so they can sort of assemble them how they need depending on the gameplay. So it's literally, if you take 90 minutes of music, let's say, I write 90 minutes of music, that's extrapolated probably into 9+ hours of music in the game. It'd be like if you said, hey, give me a Supreme pizza. And I said, okay, here's your flour, and here's your water, and here's your pepperoni, and here's your green onions, and I gave you all the independent pieces, and then you basically were allowed to assemble the pizza kind of any way you wanted to. That's the most basic correlation I get with how I deliver the music to them for them to implement in the game. If you're just exploring, let's say, and we know that this is going to be exploring at the beginning of the game. So you haven't quite discovered anything yet. So it's not super scary. It's more like mysterious and dark and brooding. There would be a very specific piece for that, because there'd be another piece for maybe if you're exploring a little later in the game. Definitely a different piece if you were exploring at the very end of the game. And then every one of those little pieces of pepperoni or green pepper is kind of its own like secret sauce. So like you said, one would be a drone, right? So anything can kind of like stand on its own. Like you could play just that pineapple stem and it would have its own little thing going on. And a lot of times it's like a 50-50 split between the guys making the game, grabbing specific things from me and sort of baking them into their own little single slice of pizza. And they say, this is what we want the music to do right here. But then in another instant, because maybe there's a shift in the dialogue, they'll have the 3 or 4 elements completely on their own, where they're moving in and out of the space in the game, like being turned up and down, kind of depending on some of these decisions and how the gameplay is being affected. So it's like maybe there's 4 or 5 different little tiny pieces of music playing, but you only hear one of them until a decision is made and something gets tripped, and then another one comes in, and it makes it feel very Hollywood scored. Like you're walking down the hallway and you go around the corner and something else comes in with the music, but it's doing it interactively, which is what's so amazing. It's doing it in real time. Like I like all of it. I think what I like is not doing the exact same thing all the time. And if you made me choose between a specific medium, I would probably pick games, because it's not always how do we put together this interactive music puzzle and make it work with a variety of scenarios. There could be some of the bigger games. I did a game called Far Cry Primal that was very interactive. It was for Ubisoft, and it had 2 or more hours of music, but then they also had, I think it was 3 hours of cinematics that needed music underneath them. And those are the linear, they're basically mini movies. It's a little 1 to 3 minute movie that plays in the game, and that needs to be scored from beginning to end. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with games. All the time. Especially when I'm listening to the big picture, when I'm kind of writing the music. It's about how do these pieces interact with each other, and they need to be all playing at the same time and still not be a complete and total mess. It needs to sound like a full, polished piece. And it's very rare that you have that kind of a mix in the game. Maybe if it's an action sequence and you're being chased, the music really comes front and center. But for a lot of stuff with these kind of games, it's more about the sparseness of the music. So I'll hear things on their own, or like you said, combined with one other thing. They're from the same piece of music, and I wrote the music, but it works on its own in a different way than me sitting in the room by myself just listening to the harp and celeste or whatever. You put in the atmosphere and the sound design and the fog, and it just takes on a life of its own. It's very much all the time like, oh wow, I didn't realize that could do that, and that's really cool. It's like, you know, it becomes greater than just the cue, because it's all about the experience.